Hi everybody and welcome back to English Practice. This is a vocabulary tutorial on the two words hard and hardly because they are easy to confuse, and it's very important to know the difference because obviously there is one. Let's start with hard and let me walk you through here. You can say Mark is a hard worker, and you can say Mark works hard. In that first sentence, Mark is a hard worker. Hard is an adjective, all right? It describes the noun worker, which makes it an adjective. In that second sentence, hard is an adverb. Mark works hard. It describes the verb. How does he work hard? And the meaning here is he works a lot. So you already see that hard is both an adjective and an adverb, which means, of course, that hardly cannot be the adverb of the adjective hard, and of course it isn't in that second sentence. You cannot say Mark works hardly. That doesn't work. You can use hard as an adjective and as an adverb, and it means a lot. Good, so much for hard, that's easy enough. And now let's continue with hardly, and let's first have a look at a couple of examples. You were so unfriendly to me today. You hardly spoke to me. Or you want to marry George? I don't think that's a good idea. You hardly know him. And how much money have you got? Hardly any. And now let's have a look at those examples in particular and see what the hardly in that sentence actually stands for. You were so unfriendly to me today. You hardly spoke to me. The meaning of hardly here is very little, almost not. So you see already that it doesn't have anything to do with the adverb hard. You hardly spoke to me means you spoke to me very little, almost not at all. All right? This is very, very different from the adverb hard. It's actually almost the opposite. Second example, you want to marry George? I don't think that's a good idea. You hardly know him. Again, your hardly here means very little or almost not. You hardly know him is you know each other very little. You almost don't know him. So that's why it's not a good idea to marry him. You hardly know him. And that third example, how much money have you got? Hardly any. Or you can say hardly anybody passed this test. And here the meaning is hardly any is like very little or almost none. How much money have you got? Hardly any. Very little money or almost none. And that second sentence here, that hardly anybody, is a synonym for almost nobody. Hardly anybody passed the test. Almost nobody passed the test. Very few people passed the test. Okay, and you want to remember that we often use hardly in combination with anybody, anyone, anything, or anywhere with those any compounds. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so much for hardly. Before I have 2 pages of exercises for you, let's have a look at 2 more sentences to show you the difference between hard and hardly and make that even clearer. He tried hard to find a job, but he had no luck. The adverb hard means he tried a lot to find a job, but he had no luck. It's obvious he didn't find a job. He hardly tried to find one. This is completely different. This is the opposite almost. He tried very little to find one. So hard as an adverb often means a lot, and hardly, which is an adverb of course, often means very little, almost not. He hardly tried to find one. He tried very little to find a job, and this is why obviously he didn't find one. Alright, so much for the grammar explanation and the difference between hard and hardly. Now I have 2 pages of exercises for you, and this is the first one. I want you to stop the video now Get pen and paper and answer the question whether these sentences are right or wrong, and then correct the wrong ones. And when you're finished, you start the video again, and then we compare. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, hit the pause button please and do your exercise. Here we are back again, and this is your first sentence. Your first sentence is correct. I'm tired because I've been working hard. You need the adverb hard in that sentence. The second sentence also is correct. I tried hard to remember his name, but I couldn't. And the third sentence is also fine. This pullover is unused. I've hardly worn it. I've worn it almost not at all, okay? I've hardly worn it, so you need the hardly adverb in that place. Next sentence. He's a good tennis player. He hits the ball hard. Alright, hardly is not correct here. You cannot say he hardly hits the ball. You can of course say he hardly hits the ball, but then that wouldn't make a good tennis player. It's he hits the ball hard. Next sentence. I hardly slept last night. Okay, which means that I almost didn't sleep. I hardly slept last night. You can say I slept hard last night, which means maybe that you were lying on the floor, on a wooden floor, and then you slept hard. But in this sentence here, I would say that hardly is the better choice. I hardly slept last night. And then we could hardly believe it. And not we could believe it hard. That doesn't make sense at all. We could hardly believe it. You need that adverb hardly in the sentence. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so much for the first page of exercises, and I have another page for you. In these sentences, put in hardly plus any, anybody, anything, anywhere, or ever. So, hit the pause button again, please, and do your exercise. And when you're finished, then you start the video again, and then we compare. Okay, let's start with the first sentence. There was hardly any wind. There was almost no wind. It's a good day. It's a sunny day. You know anything about football? No, hardly anything. I hardly know anything about football. Short answer, hardly anything. I watch TV often, but I hardly ever listen to the radio. Almost not. I hardly ever listen to the radio. He's not very popular. Hardly anybody likes him. Almost no one likes him. Very few people like him. Hardly anyone or hardly anybody likes him. This morning, there was hardly any traffic. There was almost no traffic. There's hardly anything to do in this town, and there's hardly anywhere to go. That's your combination here. There's hardly anything to do, and there's hardly anywhere to go. And the last one, I'm nearly always at home. I hardly ever go out. I rarely go out. I hardly ever go out. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so much for hard and hardly. The difference in meaning should be clear by now. Thanks for watching. We say bye-bye and have a good time.